where we are continuing in our journey through the laws of the Mishnah. And we are in Orach Chaim 158, Kuf Nun Ches. We got that rolling last week. And we're continuing with these laws, talking about Vashna Hentelach for a meal. So we talked about why you'd wash your hands and what's a meal, right? So we talked about when to have a meal and what's a meal. So, and washing the hands for the meal and why we'd wash our hands. So we're going to continue in these rules here in 158 about washing the hand. And we're going to talk about now some different rules regarding washing. So the Shulchan Aruch brings down that there are those who say that if you are eating less than an egg's volume, you should wash your hands and not say a blessing. Okay, so why is that? Well, Mishna explains. The reason for that is because the Tuma we mentioned in last week's halacha discussion, it was talking about things that could become tameh. All right, so if something is smaller than the volume of an egg, it cannot contract tuma. It cannot contract ritual impurity. So if you had hands that could potentially transfer ritual impurity, if it's smaller than an egg, it wouldn't actually receive that impurity as a result of Torah law. Okay? And therefore the tuma, like you touch this thing, bluch, and then you touch that, bluch, and the bluch goes from A to B, right? Because of your hands. Even though you aren't affected, you've ruined the food. Okay? However, this person argues that since the item would not be impacted by such a transfer, therefore one was not obligated as a result of the enactment to wash your hands. Okay? Another possibility is that when it comes to eating, really there's a pretty good consensus that if you are eating bread for a meal, you only are obligated in Birkas Hamazon when you eat more than the volume of an egg. Okay, so we hold that you still say the blessing even on an olive's worth. However, that doesn't mean that that's the same as washing your hands. If we are eating only things that are not bread, we do not wash. Even though it's right, if it's a meal that doesn't have bread, that's what we're talking about, right? Because we left off the last section talking about having to have bread. So we're talking about piece of bread. Okay. Now the question is, did the rabbis make a distinction between these different rules, or did they not? Okay. And so we said that since it's not clear, you should still wash your hands, but don't say a blessing on it. Okay. Further, it's important to note that if you were eating the size of an egg, even if the egg does not include the shell, then you would need to still wash your hands with a bracha. Okay, this is a footnote of the Degel Meravava brought down here in the Mishnah Berurah. So the egg that we're talking about means, even though we argue about what's the size of an egg, okay, everyone agrees that as long as it's the volume of an egg without its shell, that would also be included. All right, halacha gimel, the third halacha. If you eat less than the volume of an olive, those who say you do not even need to wash your hands. Okay, why is that? Because the Mishnah Berurah explains, this is not considered even eating. Okay, because you wouldn't even have an obligation to say Birchas Hamazon on such a small piece of bread. The Mishnah Berurah then proceeds to bring the Taz, who says that that's the proper halacha, that you don't have to wash your hands if it's less than this. Okay, so if you have like little tiny breadcrumb, okay, or even a crouton that looks like bread, something like that, you don't have to wash your hands for that. Okay, and then it's also the Bach's opinion as well. The Gra agrees, and the Birkei Yosef. All right, okay, and there's also the Rashbats. This is a big list over here that Richard Berurah brings down. Lachan Chamudos, Magan Abraham, Eliyah Rabbah, and others who are all here for the celebration of eating bread less than a kazayis without washing your hands. So even with less than a kazayis, you could still say that with less than an egg, you should still wash your hands and not say bracha. So therefore, you should do that. Okay. So then he adds parenthetically over here, he says, something important to note is that the size of this olive, for where you would have to wash your hands, it's even if it's crumbled, okay? All those little crumbled bread pieces are gonna be included in this. So even if you're just using breadcrumbs alone, and you just decide to have a cup of breadcrumbs, that all adds up to the size of the olive. And if you have breadcrumbs that equal up to the volume of an egg, then you would also, according to everybody, have to wash your hands with a blessing. Okay. So the thing is, so when we say an egg, the egg volume is basically about 2.5 to 3 ounces, and the olive volume is about 1 ounce. Because you can get there's a dispute a little bit of what's the size, the volume of an egg in terms of olive sizes. So in terms of volume, that's about where they're at. Especially when we're talking about something more lenient about food eating. So if you have more than a shot glass of something, then you should be washing. And if you have something larger than one of those bathroom-sized cups, you should be washing with a blessing. Okay? That's not in the Mishnah Berurah. That's just me explaining, explaining what the Mishnah Berurah is talking about. So that Mishnah Berurah explains, if you eat a little bread to reduce the sharpness of something you're drinking, okay? So we're going to talk about this later on in Reish Yud Beis 212. We're going to talk about drinking some whiskey. Then in that case, you don't have to say hamotzi, because the bread in that case is coming as something that's tafel to the whiskey, okay? Which means that it's coming to service it. It's coming to reduce the sharpness of it. So some people also say you don't have to wash your hands for that as well. Okay, so if you're not saying hamotzi, you also don't have to wash it. And he also says you don't have to wash for it even if it's above the size of an egg. And there are those who say, no, you have to at the very least wash. So the Eliyahu Rabbah brings both these opinions. And when it's less than a kazayas of bread, there are those who agree that you don't have to wash your hands at all, without any concern. Even though we just said you should be stringent, in this case you could be lenient, okay? So in a case where you're not really saying a bracha anyway on it, and there's not this, then there's not this, so not even, if you're less than a kazayas, and definitely less than if it's more than a kazayas, if it's less than a kazayas, no washing. Everyone would seem to agree to that. If it's more than a kazayas, or if it's larger than an olive, or more than a kibetza, or larger than an egg, you should be washing your hands, and you don't make a blessing on it. In this case, where it's coming to reduce the sharpness of the whiskey, because it's not servicing its own purpose, meaning to come for a meal, right? It's not for the purpose of a meal. Okay, halacha dalid, number 4. Okay, so here's a fun law. If you are eating something that is being immersed in one of the seven liquids, okay? So there's this thing known as shiva mashkin, the 7 liquids that are considered capable of transferring impurity from an impure thing, like a dead sheretz, right, to your holy food, the heilige truma, whichever you're having. So those 7 are yad, shachat, dam, yud, dalad, shin, ches, tes, dalad, mem. And those are respectively yayin, wine, dvash, honey, shemen, oil, chalav, milk, tal, dew, dam, blood, mayim, and water. So those are your 7 liquids that are transferable through, they transfer tuma. They are carriers for it. And you don't dry your hands, okay? And you don't touch any of the food with this hands, okay? So meaning you get your hand. Let's say there's blood on your hand. You have a cut, okay, and now you want to touch some bread. Even if the cut part isn't going to touch the bread, or in this case, you're going to be dunking the bread into something else like this, okay? Or this is actually a case of anything. It could be vegetables being dipped into any of these type of liquids, or that liquid is present. You have to you should be washing your hands, okay? And the Ramah adds that's even if you're only dipping in the top of the veggie, right? So you have this blood coming on your hand, right? You cut your hand because you were cutting carrots to dip into your dairy dip, right? You made your dairy dip with some oil, okay, and some milk, right? And you're gonna dip it in there and you're gonna eat it. You have to wash your hands, okay? Even if you're only dipping the top of the thing in there, or the top of the fruit in there, right? Top of the veggie or the fruit. Okay, Mishnah explains why are we concerned about certain types of fruit juices. So the Mishnah explains that it's talking about the whites of the eggs, the egg wash itself, right? Egg whites, all right? And these other type of things that aren't really part of the 7 species, okay? And so and we'll be coming back to them, at another point. And the reason why is because the liquids themselves that come from the fruits, if it's mixed in with the bread, the bread dough itself, that doesn't make it capable of receiving any type of ritual impurity, okay? So then the dough itself would, even if it came in contact with that stuff and that stuff came in contact with something that was impure, it's not going to ruin your dough. And therefore the dough will remain in its ritual purity. However, if you did get it wrong, and you ruined it, you would have to then destroy it, okay? But you're not supposed to do that because you're not allowed to destroy things that are pure, okay? And another problem is eating it wouldn't be appropriate because most people nowadays are considered to have contracted impurity from the dead. If you didn't touch it, someone else touched it and touched you, and everyone has tumah, right? It's just all tumah. At any other day of the year, what you do is to mix the dough with a little bit of water, and at that point, when you touch it, you're going to say it's tumah, and you can get rid of it, okay? And these laws are brought down in Yoreh De'ah, Siman Shin Chaf Tes, in Yoreh De'ah, section 229. But nowadays, for example, like if you're making something for Pesach, there's lots of times when you're going to mix fruit juice with water, and you can't do that, okay? And, for Ashkenazim at least. So therefore, what you should use is to have less dough, and if you mix less dough, you wouldn't have to take the Kohen. So the cake, yes, to answer your question, someone asked a question on the chat. We were talking about cake last week. The point was to say that by cake, you're exempt from washing. And in this case, you're making bread. So cake is made in a different fashion where it looks like kisnin, which we won't get into right now. So if they're cakes or flaky and things like that, yes, you're right. They are exempt from the rules of washing. Here we're talking about where you have some dough that was mixed with water. It was mixed with fruit juice in its majority, and now we're adding a little bit of water, so that way if it comes in contact with something that's impure, you would ruin the whole dough. Okay? And so the problem is getting rid of the challah from such a dough when you have a large amount of it. Okay, and they say also it's different that a Kohen Katan, maybe they could have such challah. So, okay, and so therefore that's how you can get rid of some of these issues if you came in contact with it. Okay, no, it's okay. It makes sense. It's a good question, and yeah, the grains last week that we mentioned are specific grains, and these are specific liquids. So it's a good question. Yeah, not derailing anything. It's a good question. These are specific liquids that you're using to mix into the overall mixture. Okay, and so that's what we're saying is that you need to still wash your hands when you have these things come in contact. Okay, and that if you touch your hands to the dough, if there isn't any water in it or any of the other liquids in it, then the dough would be kind of problematic. So that's why he's recommending to add a little water to them. Although technically, if you only used fruit juice, then they wouldn't be hamotzi anyway. But we're not going to discuss that. A Gentile baker cannot transmit tumah. That is correct. Okay, so all right, so we're taking a break from talking about bread, and now we're going to talk about other fruits and vegetables. So, okay, so the next halacha, number 5, is if you wash your hands for fruits, that makes you a haughty person. Okay, megase haruach. All right, you're very haughty. Okay, why? The Berurah explains on that. He says you're washing your hands as if it's like an absolute obligation, like it is by the bread. But if you're washing your hands to be a cleanly person, or because your hands are dirty, you're like, oh, look at my hands. Hands are dirty. My hands aren't dirty. But if you look at your hands are dirty. Right? Hands are dirty. You can wash your hands for that. The Shulchan Aruch continues, and he says if you have roasted meat, some people say that as long as there is still juices welling out into the top of your meat, that's considered like fruits. And also, if you make a cooked dish from wheat kernels, okay, and they've dried out, that is considered like fruits. Okay, so washing for those things would be kind of silly. So the Mishnah wants to answer the question, why are you a haughty person for washing your hands? Why? He says, like, I am so frum. I am so observant. Watch me, wash me. Right? Watch me, wash me hands. Watch me do that. So you don't need to do that. Okay? So you don't have to wash your hands for fruits. And that's what we were saying earlier. It's only for bread. Okay? So when we're saying not to do it over here, it's because if you're washing your hands to feel like I have to do this. And even though you're not blessing on it. All right? So you're not going to wash your hands in this case unless you're just washing it for fun, as long as you're aware that it's not an obligation. Oh, the raccoons. Well, the raccoons were washing the food, though. Right? They were washing their hands. I guess they're washing their hands in the course of washing their food. So someone's making a reference to the fact that raccoons are now being found washing their food. So yes, the raccoons would be very haughty, and they'd have to be dealt with appropriately. They should learn some humility. There's some classes in humility for the raccoons. When you're washing hands because they're not clean, it would be an exception to this rule. Mishna says that later commentators on Shulchan Aruch all agree that even if you don't know if your hands are dirty, and you just want to wash them, right? You didn't necessarily touch like a wet rodent, and now we're gonna touch the bread. You're just like my hands. My hands though, they don't have that lemony fresh scent to them. My hands, they don't have that. They've lost that scented feeling. Yeah, they don't feel good. They don't feel clean. That's okay. Okay. You just want to wash your hands. You could do that. And you can also wash your hands and say, I want to wash my hands, and say the blessing on the food with clean hands. So when the Ramah says that your hands were not clean, it's just to tell us that even if they were not clean in a way where they would be required to be washed, okay, and just that maybe they could be washed just for the purpose of the blessing itself, to say the blessing on the food. Nonetheless, you shouldn't wash them as if to say, I am washing my hands for this purpose. No, you're scrubbing them under the water, right? You do something like that. That would be better than to make it seem like you're doing it for an obligation. So scrubbing your hands with soap would be fine. Using Purell would be fine. But to take a kli and lavish water upon your hands for this case would be not a great idea. Okay. Let's see. So let's talk about these what are called? So we've roasted meat and we have cooked grains. So it appears that for these type of things, that when you have the juices coming out of the steak, like you roasted the steak, right, and it's coming out of the meat, that's not really considered a liquid, because it's not any of the other things. It's not blood, it's not water, it's not this, it's not that. However, if it's floating on the surface like it's water, or because of the water that's been on it, then you have to say that is liquid, right? So you have to make a differentiation for it. So if there's no blood, right? Well, you've already soaked it and salted it, and now you're just cooking it. Okay, that stuff could be a problem because it's not blood, but it could very well be water. But it's just not normal for roasted items to be, super wet like that. It's possible, but really they tend to be dried out as they're getting roasted. The Gra writes that if it was rinsed with water before it was roasted, so then that is what we're referring to in this case. And you'd have to be concerned about that being on top, and you would have to wash your hands as a result of the actual law and not just for astringency. Okay, but everything's dry, so meaning that the steak is dry and these grains that you cooked are dry. The gravy and the sauce and all that stuff that's there have dried up. Okay, because if they're floating on the top of it, then that is considered something that's been dipped in a liquid, and we had just learned that you should actually wash your hands for that. Okay, however, if it doesn't have that, then you consider it like fruits. Okay, and so the later authorities all seem to agree that that certain types of cooked foods that are not touched with your hand but are eaten only with a spoon do not require you to wash your hands. Okay, and that's even if you touch them a little bit with the spoon. All right, so like you're eating, and then something fell out and touch it with your finger. So you still don't have to wash your hands for that. Okay, and that's our custom. But if someone wants to be touched all the time, like if you take your bread and you dip it inside of it, okay, that wouldn't work. Cooked fruits, compotes, okay, they're cooked in water. So the later authorities seem to debate whether these require a hand washing, like a stringent hand washing. So we say that you should. So if you cook the fruits in water, you make a big goop out of it. Even if you're using a spoon, you should still wash your hands ahead of time. Okay, because you might come to touch it. So if people have washed the fruits with water and you're gonna eat the fruits, you need to wash your hands. Okay, over the middle of the meal, you've already done that. Okay, but certain things are just washed together. Some of them are pickled, like he gives an example over here of peaches. Okay, so because peaches come in a can, right? So someone put them there, and there's liquid all over them. So that's why you should be stringent. He says, even if you're using a spoon or a fork or whatever. So if you don't dry it off from the water, the obligation is from the initial rule itself. And in the work Derech HaChaim, he says that if you eat noodles, okay. Oh, I'm sorry, you're eating cookies. I thought it was lakshin. It's lekich. So you're eating some of these things, and you're eating them with your whiskey. That's not considered. You don't, even though they're doing that, people don't dip cookies in whiskey. It's just not a thing. That's just not a thing. And the stuff that's going on of it is also not a thing to be worried about. It's considered less than liquid, okay? And it's considered actually fruit juices, and it's not considered something that would transfer impurity anyway. And especially considering that the whiskey itself is mixed with water that's evaporated off of it. Nonetheless, it's only a little bit. All right, you don't have to wash for such a thing. So if you're dipping your cookies into whiskey, you don't have to wash your hands. Okay? But if there's a lot of water, then the rule would be different. He gives an example of something called Grodin, but I'm not sure what Grodin is. Okay, so if they have these little cookies, and they're smaller than a kazayas, like the little tiny cookies, then you definitely don't have to worry about it, just like we said earlier in the Mishnah Berurah number 10. Okay, so I think we will hold it here at number 5. We will pick up again with number 6 next time. Thank you very much for joining as we go through our journey of hand washing and the meal. Until next time, have a great day.